Before we kick off this week's episode of Socially Democratic, I just want to take a moment to pay tribute to James' mentor. James, or Jim, or Jimmy, passed away last Tuesday evening, which was incredibly sudden. James was in his late 30s, and it's somewhat, fitting that today's episode is talking about tertiary student campus politics, because that's how James got his entry into the broader Labor family through campus politics here in Victoria, and got involved in NUS and the Student Unity faction. He was also heavily involved in Young Labor and went on to become a state conference delegate through the Kooyong FEA. Jim also spent a lot of time working in various state and federal MPs' offices, and at the time of his passing, he was an elected officer for Senator Raf Giacone. It's incredibly shocking to hear the news of James's passing. Aside from obviously being a great comrade, he also was a massive Pies fan, loved his rugby union and sport in general. He was quiet, but you knew where you stood with James in terms of what was most important to him when he did speak. We want to pass on our condolences to the mentor family and to all of his friends and colleagues that will be grieving at this time, and our prayers are with everyone in this moment. The different factions have runners. They run around with those bits of paper and try to get various other cog tables to sign off on it, and would come to me. If it didn't have a student unity tick, that meant that we weren't on board. I sat on that. I literally would put it under my bum, which is absolutely terrible. Like, that's just undermining democracy right there.
Did you ever eat paper?
No, I never did that.
There was only one thing that SALT and Unity voted together on against NLS, and that was our use of laminators because they couldn't be ripped.
The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in 2025, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members as well, and you can join our community for free or for as little as $1.50 a month, and you too can help support this podcast. All paid members receive a welcome gift, so if you have recently signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking for your shipping address, because without that, then we can't send you your merch. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn has been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years. They believe the law should serve everyone and not just those that can afford it. So for empathetic and expert legal support, call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Friday morning on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And my guest for today is the president of the National Union of Students, the peak body that represents student unionism on campus in the higher education sector across our great nation. And I'm pleased that she's taken time out of her busy schedule to come on the show. Ashlyn Horton, welcome to Socially Democratic.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We had your predecessor, one of your predecessors, on several years ago. Molly Wilmot, I think it was the former national president.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I did it because, we did it because at the time there was some stuff going on in the student world that was super interesting. I think it might have been during COVID, and we were keen to get a sense of what was going on in campus at a campus level there. And upon doing that, I thought, this is a good thing. We should do this every year. We should get the national president on every year. And then I didn't live up to my word. And it occurred to me this year that we didn't do that. And so I'm wrapped. And I want this to become a standing thing. So future NUS president aspirants know that you will have to come on Socially Democratic for a chat about student politics and student unionism. So I really appreciate you taking time to come on the show today. Before we get into sort of the more contemporary stuff about life on campus and the state of the union, I'm super interested to get a sense of what was your entry into student politics? How did you find your way in this world?
Well, I joined the Labor Party when I was in high school. It was 2021, middle of COVID, and I was, so in deep, with studying for my exams, and then I was just so frustrated at the government, and I was like, got to change the government. And so I joined the party, did a bit of door knocking, then I got to ANU and I just made a beeline for like the Labour Left Club, and had coffee with some people, and then I found myself at an NLS caucus, and I've just been involved ever since, basically.
Why did you, and I completely 100% agree, we're all thinking, oh my God, the federal government's absolutely making a mess of this. Strategically in your mind, what drew you to the Labor Party? Why strategically did you want to join the Labor Party in particular to try and change the government?
Well, I think that the Labor Party is just a party of government, and I wanted to be able to make change from within, I guess. I love how the Labor Party policy platform is formed by its rank and file members. And, so I saw it as like a really effective vehicle for change. And being more progressive in the party meant that you could push the party further to the left from within.
Yep.
So, yeah.
When I know when I joined the Labor Party, also like you at high school, because I also wanted to change the government. We had Jeff Kennett as the premier at the time. And I remember my dad dropped me off at the Warrigal Community Centre on I'm going to get the street wrong. It's on Victoria Street near the Arts Centre. And Dad said to me, son, before you go in there, I just need you to know that this is going to be one of the most boringest meetings you'll ever go to, but it won't be like that. My dad wasn't in the Labor Party. It was a Labor voted family, but he said it won't always be like that. So don't walk out of that meeting thinking that, is that it? Because you will find your own people eventually. And I moved to Melbourne and got, like you, I joined the Labor Club, got involved with student politics and that kind of stuff. The rest is history. But what's the experience now for a young person when they join the Labor Party? Do you naturally find young people straight away, or was that journey, did you sort of have to go a bit of trial and error kind of experience?
I think that Young Labor is quite strong in basically all states and territories. So if you join, you will find people.
Yeah.
And especially if you're a university student, I think there's a Labor Club on every single campus, basically. So, yeah, it's quite easy to find your people, I think.
When you're now the national president, did you choose the national presidency or did the national presidency choose you?
It's a bit of both. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do because I was working for a member of the ACT Legislative Assembly last year, and he lost his seat at the election, which was devastating. And it also meant that I had to find a new job for this year. So not only was I doing the ACT election last year, I was also doing our NUSA elections and helping to run that campaign. And so after my minister lost the ACT election, I was talking to my friend Millie, who was last year's NUSA GenSec.
NUSA being the
ANU Students Association. And Millie said to me, look, I can help you get this comms job that I think you'd be really good at, but I think you would have more fun as NUS president.
Hell yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's a really good point, because obviously the comms job paid a lot more. And so I was thinking about it, but, she was right. I would have more fun as president. And so I made some calls, like, in my faction, as you do. And I kind of just asked people, like, hey, I'm thinking of running. What are your thoughts? And most people said, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. And I was like, oh, okay. And now here we are. And you were almost halfway through your term, if you think about it. Jesus, because it's June 13. Oh, my God. Yep.
Where's the year gone? And I'm just super interested, first of all, get a sense of what life is like on campus now for students, because I know that when Molly Wilmot was on the show, it was during COVID, and you could sense that there was this shift. I mean, obviously, certainly experience here in Victoria was that all the stuff was done from home, learning was done from home, and obviously COVID has altered the way that we work. There's, work from home now has become the new norm, and I'm just interested in getting a sense of how did COVID impact life on campus for university students. So what does it look like in 2025 if you're a university student?
I think it's very different to what it was pre-COVID. Campus culture has never fully recovered, I don't think, and because all lectures are just pre-recorded, there's not really a reason to go on campus anymore. And, the average student today is not like the average student of, 20 years ago.
What do you mean by that?
Cost of living is something that really affects students more than it has in the past, I think. Yeah. Like more students are self-sufficient, having to work multiple part-time jobs just to scrape by. And so obviously students are going to prioritize being able to afford to live than actually going to their lectures.
Yeah.
Especially when they're able to watch the recordings at home later. So it is a shame. But yeah, I would say that's how things are now.
And what about, you talked about student campus life in general, like obviously, so we don't need to go attend our lectures, tutorials. When I went to La Trobe, and I'm going to do a lot of this in this podcast, back in my day, tutorials were compulsory. You couldn't miss a tutorial. I think you got like 2 strikes, 3 strikes, and you were out. Basically, it was like baseball. And I don't know. I'm sure that varies from tertiary institution to tertiary institution these days. But there was a need that you had to go on campus because you at least had to attend your tutorials. And so there's really nothing that's bringing students onto campus anymore in terms of a compulsory setting.
Some courses still have compulsory participation. Others have like participation as a percentage of their grade. So something that you'll hear often is like copping the 10 and just like being okay to lose that 10% of your overall grade for not going to any of your tutes. But yeah, that's something I've done before.
Copping the 10. I love that. I've never heard that. I never had that luxury. I was a terrible student, so I needed that 10.
Right. It's not too bad. But I think that universities are starting to try and get students back in.
The other thing that my experience was different. So I lived on campus because I was from the country. I was in one of the colleges, but certainly the other thing that you noticed on Thursday, because Thursday night at La Trobe was bar night, the campus was busier on Thursday anyway. And I think it was because people just wanted to go for a beer afterwards and go to bar night. Bar night was huge, right? And I'm assuming that's the case at ANU or whatever other campus that we're talking about. And maybe this is a bit of a segue into sort of the impact that voluntary student unionism has had, but even like the extracurricular activities that you could find on campus, like bar nights, like film nights, like the Sports and Rec Association and whatever sort of social sport you might be playing throughout the week. These were the other things that kind of kept you on campus as well. What's happening in that space now for universities in terms of trying to draw students into sort of that extracurricular, or even clubs and societies, like where, what's happening in that world?
Obviously, as part of my job, I go to a lot of university campuses around the country. And something I can say incredibly confidently is that universities that have independent student unions have a much better campus culture because the union will run events, clubs are just more active, I guess, when they're affiliated to the union. A lot of unions have outlets on campus, so you've got like really cheap food and drinks. One of my favourite visits has been to the UWA Tavern because they have $7 pints, and that's just unheard of. So I'm a big fan of that.
Shout out to UWA Student Union. So it's the 20th anniversary of the introduction of voluntary student unionism. I had to Google that and I was stunned that was 20 years ago. And I just want to get a sort of sense from you about what the status is for student unionism broadly across campuses in 2025. How much has VSU had an impact on that? So maybe talk about some of the areas where it has survived and thrived and done well, but some of the areas that perhaps not so much.
On campuses where the unions did have those outlets, like their TAVs and cafes and stuff like that, they were able to keep more afloat. I think UQ is a really good example of that. And they've got a really, really strong union. But at a lot of places, the unions just collapsed because they didn't have any money. So services had to get cut, and they just died, basically. And then the universities replaced the unions with these really not very democratic SRCs. And we haven't fully recovered from that. We're trying, but now that most student unions are funded by SAF, they're in this constant struggle with their universities for like their SAF agreements. And something about ANU that I really hope that someone fixes in the future is that the ANUSA SAF agreement says that ANUSA can't use SAF to purchase alcohol. And I want that changed so we can buy our campus bar because we currently don't have one.
Okay, so I'm all for that. And whatever I and the social democratic community can do to support you on that, we're there with you. First of all, what does SAF stand for, and unpack this agreement that exists? What exactly is this agreement? What does it seek to do?
So SAF is the Student Services and Amenities Fee, and it was a policy that was introduced by the Gillard government, I believe, as almost like a partial reversal of VSU, but not quite. But it was a bit of like a lifesaver for student unions. So basically every semester when you like enroll in your courses, you have to pay this student services and amenities fee to the university. The university will collect all of that money. And then if you've got a union that is able to negotiate with the uni, they'll sign a SAF agreement to receive a portion of the SAF that the university receives. Something that came out of the Accords last year, which was really, really exciting, was a legislated minimum 40% SAF having to go towards student-led organisations. So basically 40% going to student unions. So we were very excited when that got announced. And this is the first year that legislation is like in place. But we are kind of seeing the universities try and scoot around it, because student-led organisation just means that like it needs to be a majority of students, not completely students. So if you've got a board that is mostly students, but there's still like a lot of staff and management representation on there, then that still counts. So we're working to change that.
Okay, so a couple of questions that I want to follow up on that one. What kind of quantum are we talking about? I'm assuming that the student, the fee to each individual student, the annual fee to each individual student would vary based on the campus, right? The amount they would collect. But broadly speaking, what kind of quantum would you say that the university is collecting annually from students?
So the maximum amount that a university is allowed to collect in SAF per year from each student is around $350. So they collect millions in SAF revenue every year.
Yeah, okay.
But it can also go on your HEX.
Okay.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people don't know that. But I've never paid my SAF up front. I just put it on my HEX. So
that's interesting, because once again, here we go. Back in my day, that was everything you could put on HEX that you couldn't put on HEX. That one you had to actually go stump up. Yeah, I remember physically walking to the admin building and going and paying that.
Yeah.
It's compulsory, obviously, so they've all got to pay it. The initial arrangement in which it was less than 40% was given over to a student-led body. What was the university doing with the rest of the money?
Something that I think a lot of people don't know is that when VSU was first introduced, it was hated by everyone, and that included the universities, because all the unions used to run all of the services on campus. And so when the unions didn't have the funds to keep those services running, the university had to take them over because they recognised that those services were really important to the university community, I guess. Yeah. And so because of that, those services still do exist and they are still run by the university. And so staff keeps them running.
Okay, yep. So the government's now increased it to 40%. The unions at a local level is now starting to negotiate with this, but it's not necessarily working out well everywhere. And I want to go to one particular campus, which is my alma mater, La Trobe University. I was very fortunate. I was invited by the student leadership to come and talk to them maybe a month ago. Amelia, the president, now they're a very talented, capable group of student leaders there. And they were informing me about what is going on at La Trobe, what has transpired at La Trobe University, in which there's this sort of essentially a shit fight really between the administration, the student association, and then almost what I would call like a fake student union where they're allocating money. It's outrageous. And I know, and I just want you to unpack it for us, Ash, because there is certainly a number of alma mater that went to La Trobe University that listen to this podcast, and they will be outraged to hear what exactly is going on at La Trobe University. Tell us about what the hell La Trobe University admin is doing to destroy student unionism.
Well, back in 2020, I want to say, La Trobe set up the LTSA, so the La Trobe Student Association, in competition with the La Trobe Student Union. And the LTSA just wasn't that democratic, wasn't very independent, and spent a ridiculous amount of money on branding and stuff that just wasn't relevant. But the LTSU kind of won in a way in that fight. So the LTSU is the only student association on the Bundoora campus, but the LTSA still represents the regional campuses. But this year, the university announced this new student representative body called the La Trobe Student Council, which is wildly undemocratic. So it bans people that have been on the LTSU or the LTSA from standing for election.
Yep.
And the university can disqualify candidates at their discretion, basically. And it is just obviously a huge threat to student representation and democracy, basically, at the university. And so it is something that we're worried about and we're keeping an eye on. And we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Is this happening across other campuses as well? Like, is La Trobe like the worst case scenario of this in terms of an attack on student control of student affairs, or is this something that other universities are either looking at or dabbling with? Or
I would say La Trobe is the worst case scenario, but it's not surprising. It looks almost like a caricature of what's happening on other campuses, in that, you know, the universities are trying to scoot around the new staff legislation as much as possible. But yeah, I would say La Trobe is in the worst state in the country.
So from as a national president of the union and representing all of these peak bodies around the country, how is the union, so not peak bodies, representing campus unions, how is the national union seeking to apply pressure on these universities that want to go rogue? Like, without, I don't know if you want to give away strategy too much on the podcast, but I just want to get a sense of like, how are you organising in such a way that is saying to universities like La Trobe University, this shit ain't on. Like, we're not going to cop this.
Well, what we did at La Trobe was we sent a letter to the entire Vice-Chancellor team, and a bunch of other peak bodies also sent letters being like, hey, this is not on. and we are like ready to kick up like a huge fuss if this continues, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a response. It was pretty lackluster. Basically, like, if anything further is to happen and if like the union were to get shut down, well, there would be like mass demonstrations, I think.
Yeah.
And we would organise quite heavily for it.
What other campaigns is the National Union at the moment focusing on in 2025? I was interested in terms of what are the sort of issues that are confronting students at the moment that you guys want to sort of speak up about?
Something that I'm working on a lot at the moment is university governance, because it's probably like one of the most focused on issues of this year. So making sure that students are properly represented in university governance. And I am quite hopeful that we're getting somewhere with that. So having a mandated minimum amount of students on university councils who are elected rather than appointed,
Yep.
Which is super exciting. Obviously, we're trying to keep on pushing for the age of independence to be lowered from 22 to 18, because it's ridiculous that it's still 22. But something else that I'm working on at the moment is student policy and research, because the NUS hasn't had a research officer since 2020, I want to say. And the NUS used to put out a lot of reports on student issues, and it was really the only body that was putting out research like that was actually led by students. Because there are quite a few higher education policy research institutes, but none of them are actually led by students. And I think that's a huge issue. And then something else that has been quite exciting in the last week or so is AI policy. Obviously, AI is something that we just have to live with now, I guess, and adapt to it. But the university's response to AI usage has very much just been plagiarism, shut it down sort of thing. We want to make sure that students are actually in those conversations about AI policy in higher education, because at the moment, the students are just terrified that even if they didn't use AI for something, they're going to like pop up in an AI detector and have absolutely no way to prove that they didn't use it, because there is no way to prove that you didn't use it.
So practically, what does that look like? So a student submits a paper for assessment. It goes through some sort of AI. The university has an AI checker to see if it is their own work or if it's just heavily drawn sources from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. But there are instances where the AI checker suggests that a certain percentage of this is not their own work, but in actuality, it is their work.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I can understand why. So the feeling is amongst the student body is that they're obviously wanting some certainty. Or like the administrators at universities, how are they dealing with AI in terms of like what kind of policies are they trying to create to?
Well, it feels like the policy at the moment is just don't use it.
Great, that's good.
And obviously, people are going to use it, and sometimes there will be courses where the conveners recognise that people are going to use it, but there's not really thorough guidelines around what using it looks like and when it's too much sort of thing. So because it is such a new area, there really just isn't much policy around it yet. It's still like being created, and we want to make sure that when that policy is being formed, that students are at the table in those conversations.
I want to ask you about that in a minute, but I'm interested, why is it though that the universities are struggling to grapple with this, do you think? What's the driver behind that? That's what I'm curious about.
It's got a lot to do with like the higher education standards and tertiary education quality guidelines in Australia. Again, because it's such a new area, it's just very difficult to grapple with. And it just feels like there is such a disconnect between the policy and the people the policy will actually impact, which is the students.
Yeah. NUS did some media during the week, which you just alluded to before, calling on the government to. Well, you tell us what the media was around. What are you demanding in terms of your seat at the table on this topic?
The Minister for Industry last week or the week before at a conference around AI said that he wanted unions to be really present in forming AI policy for the workplace, which was really exciting. And then it kind of begged the question, well, what about students being represented in education policy?
Yeah.
And so it was really good to see that got picked up because it is an issue that I don't think a lot of people are considering in those policy-making spaces, because, again, it always feels like students are the last ones to hear about the policy that's going to affect them.
It's funny you say that, because I think that's what Molly and I talked about that when she was on the show a couple of years ago, and that's the same theme, was that she was saying that students are the last people to be thought of when making policy that directly impacts students. Like you are the stakeholder, you are the person, the people that are going to be directly impacted by this. You think that universities, administrations and policymakers would be sitting down with students, and actually having a conversation with them about saying, how can we better support you in your ability to learn and set you up for life to get good quality jobs. And as you say it out loud, and the fact that that's not happening, you sort of think, what's going on there? But clearly that's not changed much since Molly was president.
Yeah, and it feels like people are starting to recognise that student input is important, or rather they're recognising that it's important to look like there's been student input. Universities, I feel like, are just treating student consultation like a box they need to check off. And so something that I find happens a lot, and I know that a lot of other student leaders find happens, is there'll be some decision made, and then that decision will be brought to the student for feedback. And it's like, well, why wasn't the student involved in the decision-making process in the first place?
Yeah.
That's the main issue. And I remember I had this one consultation with this one group where they had written this letter or something, and they wanted my feedback on the letter. And I read it and I was just like, why is the letter being written in the first place? This isn't what students are looking for. So again, it's a huge issue of students need to be actually part of that decision-making process. And it's the same with research on higher education policy and student equity. The students need to be the ones leading the direction of that research, because they're the ones who actually know where the issues lie and what needs to be delved into further.
Do you do much work with any of this sort of policy think tanks, particularly of the centre-left persuasion, to support you in that work? I'm only thinking that because I certainly know that some of the leaders within some of those think tanks listen to this show, so maybe we can make a connect there for you guys to reach out. But I mean, is that something that you've found you've had support from, or is it really up to you guys to try and do this heavy lifting yourselves?
It is very much up to us. Because of VSU, the NUS's funding has decreased a lot over the past 20 years.
I can imagine.
So we're just not able to fund research in the way that we used to, which is really disappointing, because it means that all the time that I could be spending campaigning and doing other things, I'm instead spending in the library on my laptop, writing all of the briefings to every single person you can imagine, doing all the submissions. And I do enjoy it, but it's also like now I'm halfway through my term and I'm running out of time.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I'm thinking to myself when I was NUS State President and I'd pop into the national office, which was literally a block away from my office, to catch up with folks. I think that in 1999, NUS, and I know that Jacob Varghese, who was your predecessor, your national president, may correct me here, but I think there was at least one full-time researcher. They may have had two full-time researchers at that time. And I was a campaigner and not a policy person, so I never really knew what they did, nor did I ever know their names. But they were in that office behind a reception doing diligent work, supporting the union at a critical time when VSU was starting to be proposed by the then Howard government. And now I feel for you because you don't have those wonderful people doing that kind of work. So maybe there's some folks listening who are in the public policy world that want to come and do some pro bono work for NUS, or at least I will connect them with you, Ash, after the show. And just broadly speaking, NUS as well, you've got EdCon coming up at the end of the month. Good to know that EdCon still happens. It's on your home turf. I think it's ANU this year.
It is.
What's happening exciting at EdCon this year? Give us the goss.
Our theme for EdCon this year is crisis, because my education officer came up with 3 themes instead of 1 for me. And I was like, well, I'm going to have to combine them somehow. So the 3 main topics that will be discussed will be the crisis in the higher education sector. So, we're seeing so many course cuts and staff cuts at our universities, and students having to deal with that. Free speech on campus, obviously, a huge issue. The cost of living crisis and the rise of the far right globally.
All right. So just small issues you're tackling here at this particular EdCon.
Yep. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fun. It's nice not having to travel for a conference for once. But I do feel really, really bad for making everyone come to Canberra for the winter.
Yeah, exactly. You're really putting through the ringer there. That you're dedicated if you come to this EdCon. It's funny you say that you it's nice not to have to travel for a conference. I was the student hack that was like, yeah, let's get road trip. This is gonna be fun. Like travel to a conference, love it.
It is fun, but I guess having to travel for all the O weeks.
You've done
at the start of the year, and I'm having to plan for the Sem 2 O weeks now. It's just. It gets tiring after a while.
The novelty's worn off.
Yep.
All right, I gotcha. Do you want to give a shout out to EdCon? Like, can people still sign up to attend or?
Yes. The booking link for EdCon is on our Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to come, tickets are $80, I believe, unless you're from a small and regional campus, in which case we've got a discount code, which you can contact our GenSec about. But yeah, it's from the 23rd to 26th of June, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Wonderful. And we'll put the link to that in our show notes as well. So if you're listening to the podcast, just click on that link that Ash has provided and sign up, get to EdCon. Good stuff. Okay, now we're coming to the bit which is more like I call hack life or faction life. For all the ex-Stu Poll listeners out there, they need a trip down NUS memory lane. First of all, give us a bit of a quick rundown of what are the factions that are still around these days. I'm sure the names have all changed, but I might, when you read them out, maybe I might try and recalibrate them back into the names that were around sort of the 90s that I know that a lot of people will be listening to the show. So who's hanging around, who's operating these days? Who's got all the power?
Well, Student Unity is still there.
Gone. Nice.
Socialist Alternative.
Okay, you're the president, so you need to be respectful to all of your fellow colleagues. Mm-hmm. I don't. So I'm assuming they're the Trots?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the old Left Alliance back in my day?
Yeah.
Great.
NLS, which is my faction.
Which is the old Norrells back in my day?
Yep. There's quite a few independents. A lot of them are from WA, so we call them Windies.
That's a good name. I like that.
Yep. Then there's a couple other left factions. One of the new ones that formed last year is called Forge. I'm not really sure what Forge means, but, they're all lovely people. So,
Great.
yep.
Where are they? Like, what are they? Ideologically grouped or personality, or?
I would say ideologically. I think we classify them as one of the left factions.
Yep.
So, conference last year was quite interesting in comparison to like my first conference, which was 2022, where because there were really only 3 factions. Everything was kind of predetermined how everyone was going to vote. So we knew how everything would turn out. It would either be like a left block of like NLS and SALT or a Labour block of NLS and Unity.
Yep.
But last year, because there were so many different left groupings, there was a lot of running around of conference floor, like getting
Corralling.
amendments through.
Yeah, right.
And it made conference more interesting, I think. It made it actually worthwhile.
Yeah.
And it was really nice to see everyone working together in that sense.
Excellent. Yeah. There used to be a group called the Non-Aligned Left, which probably their most famous member would be Van Batten, who's gone on to be a very successful playwright and has a great podcast as well. Is there a group then they were kind of like sort of basically greenie or environmentally type folks? This is pre the Greens being a thing. Is there a space for those types of students?
Well, there used to be a faction called the Grassroots Independents.
Yep.
Who I guess are like the non-aligned left. And they've still got a couple members who will come to NUS conferences, but not really, because they really only held 2 campuses, which were ANU and UCID.
Right. 2 big, decent campuses there.
Yeah. Now, again, we've got the Windies. We love the Windies. Yeah.
Let's talk. I want to just before we close that out, I want to just ask about some sort of traditions if they're still going. Particularly, let's start with the NUS conference floor. COGS. Do you still have COGS?
Yes, that's where I think the magic happens.
Without a doubt.
Really?
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I'm 100% agree. That's where the magic does happen. Yeah.
Because like I remember last year, everything was happening like on floor, and everyone was like having their yaps. And then, like, at the back of the room, it was just all the COG tables and everyone running around, especially because, like, we had so many factions and all of these decisions were getting made on the COG tables. And it was really exciting to watch. Yeah.
Explain a COG to folks who've never been on an NUS conference. Sorry, we're using too much jargon here. What's a COG?
COG is where faction leaders, I guess, will write up amendments for policy and then go and like talk to other factions and see who will support the amendment. And if it gets signed off by enough people, it'll go to business committee and then it'll get voted on, and then it will get read by the chair, and then it will get voted on by floor, and then it passes. And, you know, everyone's got their printers.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Okay, that's new.
One of the funniest things I remember from 2022 was there was only, like, one thing that SALT and Unity voted together on against NLS. And that was our use of laminators, because we laminated our procedurals and stuff so that when they got to BizCom, they couldn't be ripped. And then we weren't allowed to use our laminators anymore, which was devastating.
The laminating, I love that. It's such a great invention. And I know it's a great invention because when I was the chair of business committee, whenever So for the folks at home, as Ashley just mentioned, so the different factions have you've got runners, right? Is it the runners or the whips? Yeah.
Runners.
So they run around with those bits of paper and try to get various other cog tables to sign off on it. And then, as you've just said, if they get enough, you get enough ticks, basically, you're getting more than 50% of the floor, then it's going to get up. So it goes to business committee. It would come to me. If it didn't have a student unity tick, that meant that we went on board. I sat on that. I literally would put it under my bum and just sit on it and then decide to bring it out whenever I thought we better maybe talk about it. And then obviously the other cogs are going, why aren't we debating? Why isn't that amendment coming up on the floor that we've all agreed on? Because I was like, I'm not letting that get through. No, that's not happening just right now, which is absolutely terrible. Like that's just undermining democracy right there. But, you know.
Did you ever eat paper?
No, I never did that. I've heard about people doing that.
Yeah.
So laminating it that's ingenious. So props to NLS for doing that. So obviously business committee still exists. Another one I've got getting a little bit more conference T-shirts. Do various factions still do conference T-shirts? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. I think that before COVID, NLS used to always be in red shirts, but we've moved on to black being our colour at conferences.
Okay.
But Unity is always the same blue with the varsity font and then like the yin yang on the back. Yeah, it's
okay. The varsity font's a new thing then.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Okay. So what ours was we were always actually I can tell you the very, 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 very first Student Unity T-shirt actually was a white T-shirt with the Unity yin yang on the front in black and white.
Right.
Yeah. And it said, clowns to the left of me. What did it say? Jokers to the right, clowns to the left of me. Here I am stuck in the middle with you. That's what it said underneath it. That was the very first T-shirt. Shout out to Rob LaRocca. Then we changed it to that navy colour with the yin yang. And we have debates about do we put something like we always had a slogan each year, right? And there was an argument about does it go on the front or the back? And a friend of mine, Tom Cargill, who was the student union convener in my last year, was superstitious. And he said, every time we have it on the back, we lose getting extra office bearers. So it has to go on the front. And so that was the big debate. But this varsity font, this college font, that's not a thing that we had.
Yeah, so the front in this like varsity font just says Student Unity 2025. And then the back is the yin yang and then the like phrase underneath that.
Right. Does the other factions do T-shirts? Because NLS never used to really do T-shirts, but I remember one year they had these kind of like, you know, when you go in the 1950s, you'd go to a garage to get your car fixed, and they would always wear those kind of button-up old school shirts. They did that one year, and and everyone had their names imprinted like.
Oh, that's cute.
It actually looked cool. I remember looking at it going, oh, that's sharp. Well done. I think it might have been Jacob Varghese' year actually. But historically, you guys didn't normally do swag. But obviously that's a new thing. What about Salt, or what are they called these days? The old
Salt just has merch.
Of course, that's right.
Yeah, they've got hoodies, like they've got shirts. So they don't do conference shirts, but they all wear like their Salt stuff.
Right, okay. Missing out. Unity Punch, is that still a thing?
It absolutely is still a thing. It is my favourite drink. I love it. And I would be lying if I said it didn't play a part in my decision to become president.
Oh, wow, okay.
You know, one more year of Punch.
One more year of Punch. Love it.
Yeah.
Moral Fibre Committee. That was
no idea what that is.
Okay, that's a student unity thing. That might not be around anymore maybe.
What is it?
It was a joke. Okay, like, you know, you're like Beard Whip or, you know, Salamaster.
Yeah.
We had a moral fibre committee as well, which was kind of like a committee to just don't be a dickhead over the course of the conference. And so the moral fibre committee would judge you if you're a bit of a dickhead. It was not taken too seriously, but it existed in the sense that it was there to try and hold people accountable to, you know, some certain behavioural norms. I guess it was probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, no, we don't have that.
Any other new traditions that have been established in most recent years that I'm missing out on?
Well, something that we did last year that I think is going to become a bit of a tradition is Coin Caucus. It's an NLS thing where we bought one of the SALT books in 10-cent coins. And so, like, we moved a procedural that conference be suspended while NUS does a business transaction with salt. And then all of our members just, like, went up to the trots and, like, handed them, like, a bunch of coins. And then, like, we got our one book, which I have at home. And that was a lot of fun. So I hope that's something that we keep on doing.
Lovely.
But one of my favourite things that also started last year is National Lego Students. Is NLS, everyone really likes to joke about, like, the name. So, like, basically any word that starts with L will replace Labour. So it's, like, National Litter Students and,
Yep.
you know, things like that.
Yep.
And we just have a lot of people in caucus who really like Lego. So National Lego Students. And we've got shirts and they look really cool.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's something I just sort of reflected on while I was getting ready for the questions for today's show. And we talk about it in organising a lot in terms of, traditions and like, chants or sort of bringing a bit of fun or joy into the work. And I hadn't thought about it that's what we did when we were younger. And Marshall Gantz talks about the sort of, celebration or traditions or things like what we're talking about. It brings the joy. It fuels the soul of the work that you're doing, because organizing is hard. Unionism is difficult work. Representation is tough, right? And to bring in these traditions and maintain them and adapt them and evolve them is such a great thing. And I'm so glad to see that continues to be the case, both collectively for the actual broader student movement, but also individually within the different families of the various factions as well. So that's so super cool. And they continue to evolve. I love that. I'm sure certainly a lot of past activists listen to the show will also appreciate that as well. And great to see that it's still going. The union's been around for a long, long time now, like 91, 92, I think it was the first.
87.
87.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you. I stand corrected. 87, my God. So I was thinking about student uni. Student uni started in 91.
Yeah.
87, and it's going strong despite all of the challenges being imposed on it by various conservative governments throughout the years. So props to you, Ash, and to your team and the rest of the student movement. Well done. And thanks for coming on today's show.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck with EdCon.
Thank you.
Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.